In this video, I'm going to provide a brief overview of the peripheral nervous system and its structure and function. The peripheral nervous system consists of the nerves that carry information between the body and the brain, and it contains both sensory and motor neurons. Sensory neurons are receiving information from the various sensory receptors all throughout our body, and the motor neurons are sending signals to muscles and glands. The peripheral nervous system is built from 12 pairs of cranial nerves that are coming from the brain, mostly the brainstem, and 31 pairs of spinal nerves that are coming out of the spinal cord. Before I go further, I want to spend a few minutes talking about nerve structure. Each nerve is actually a bundle of neurons, which are also known as nerve fibers. And these nerves are arranged much like muscles, where the neurons are bundled into fascicles and connective tissue is wrapping around things. The different levels of connective tissue all end in the word neurium, since we're talking about the nervous system. And of course, there's blood vessels there to supply the nutrients needed for things to function. Nerves themselves are a mix of sensory and motor neurons for the most part, and most of it is the axons of these neurons because the cell bodies are someplace else. Typically, these cell bodies are grouped together in ganglions, which are found outside of the central nervous system, or they are stashed within the spinal cord to help protect those cells. So here's an illustration of a nerve that should look an awful lot like those illustrations we saw of muscles in an earlier unit. We see both a motor neuron with its axon terminal end sticking out here, and then we also have a sensory receptor, so our sensory neuron that is sending information to the brain. So in this case, nerve impulses are moving this way on this neuron and this way on this one. Then those axons you can see are wrapped in cells. The myelin sheath is created by cells wrapped around the axon, special cells called Schwann cells, and those are providing that insulation that allows the electrical signal to move much quickly down the axon because the depolarization can bounce from what's known as a node of Ranvier from one section to the other so that it very quickly bounces along on its way to the brain. Then those many neurons are wrapped or individually wrapped in connective tissue known as endoneurium, and then a group of them together are wrapped in a perineurium to create a fascicle, just like we have in muscles. And then a bundle of fascicles are wrapped in an epineurium, and that becomes the actual nerve traveling through the body. So you see, unlike the neurons in our brain that doesn't have a lot of connective tissue around it, the nerves in our body are much sturdier because of the protection provided by these layers of connective tissue. I also wanted to just briefly talk about where cell bodies are. So in this illustration, we have three different ways that you have neurons arranged in the nerves. On the top, we have a sensory neuron, and sensory neurons are typically unipolar in that you have a cell body and then the dendrites are going off one way and the axon off the other. And so these cell bodies are bundled very close to the spinal cord in ganglions. These are spinal ganglions, and so there will be a bunch of cell bodies, a little lump that can be visible seen just before we enter the spinal cord itself, whereas in a motor neuron, the cell body is over in the gray matter in this sort of butterfly shape that you see in the middle of the spinal cord, and everything that comes out of the spinal cord all the way to the muscle or the gland is the axon. And then finally, in these both of the sensory neurons and the motor neurons, we're talking about the voluntary, the somatic is the word we use for voluntary control. But under involuntary control, the autonomic nervous system, we actually have sort of a double neuron or two neuron pathway. We have one neuron where the cell body is in the spinal cord, and it goes out and connects with another neuron in a ganglion that is out in the body somewhere, typically very close to whatever organ it is innervating. So in this case, we've got illustrations going on to glands or to your cardiac muscle in the heart, or maybe to your digestive tissue. So these cell bodies are further away from the spinal cord than any other situation, the ones that are part of our autonomic nervous system. The peripheral nervous system has its own glial cells. There's basically two types, the Schwann cells that I already mentioned that wrap around axons to create the myelin sheath. So they're serving a role that's similar to that seen with the oligodendrocytes in the central nervous system. And then we have satellite cells, which are found outside of neurons, and they're similar to the astrocytes in that they're helping to regulate the chemical balance of the extracellular environment, things like keeping the correct ions present and also providing the nutrients that are needed. So in the illustration here, again, this is a sensory neuron because we have a cell body sort of in the middle, and then the dendrite and the axon are going off in either direction. But we can see the satellite cells here basically attached to that cell body of that neuron, very closely providing the stability that that neuron needs to be a healthy functioning sensory neuron. So let's briefly talk about the cranial nerves. As I said, there are 12 cranial nerves, and there are right and left versions of each of these. They are identified with Roman numerals, so cranial nerve 1, 2, 3, 4, but they also have names. Most of the cranial nerves are mixed with sensory and motor neurons. There are a few that are just sensory, but most of them are mixed. And the cranial nerves, some of them are innervating somatic or voluntary control, whereas other ones are autonomic or that involuntary control, all pertaining to the face, the neck, and the torso, because these are nerves that are coming from the brain and the brainstem, and they're dealing with that upper part of your body. We're looking at the underside of the brain here, similar to what we did in our lab where we dissected the brain. This is, the brain stem down here, and then the backside of the cerebellum, and the optic chiasm, this X shape as the optic nerve crosses over. We have the olfactory bulb where the sense of smell comes in. And then we can see various ends of nerves that have been cut off. So all along the brain, and then especially in the brainstem, you can see all these little nerve endings here. So the cranial nerves are rising from the brain and also from the brain stem. This picture shows you what these particular nerves do. So optic nerve, of course, is having to do with your eyes. Olfactory nerve, the sense of smell. Trigeminal nerve, which has 3 different branches, and so it is, you can see, reaching the skin and muscles of the face. The glossopharyngeal nerve is having to do with your tongue and with speech. Same thing, your hypoglossal nerve underneath your tongue, salivary glands and such. The accessory nerve goes down into your neck, and so it's more than just on your head. The vagus nerve is probably the most complex one because it actually goes all the way down into your digestive system. And so it is more than just the head and the neck. The vestibular-cochlear nerve is having to do with hearing and balance. Facial nerve, again, you have many nerves that are helping to control the muscles of the face. And then you have 3 nerves that are involved in moving the eye, the trochlear nerve, the ocular motor nerve, and the abducens nerve. Then we have the spinal nerve. So again, 31 pairs of nerves coming out basically on either side of the spinal cord, one going to the right side of the body and then opposite to the left side. These also are mixed nerves, both sensory and motor, controlling both somatic and autonomic systems. They are named after the vertebrae that the nerve comes out of. So there are 8 cervical nerves, 12 thoracic spinal nerves, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and then 1 coccygeal spinal nerve. Even though the nerves in the body contain both sensory and motor neurons, in the spinal cord, remember when you had those tracts, those spinal tracts that were exclusively sensory or exclusively motor. And so the nerves themselves basically are splitting when they reach the spinal cord. The sensory nerves are heading to what's known as the dorsal root, that of course being towards the back of the cord, and then the motor nerves are the anterior root going towards the front of the body. Here's an illustration to try to show what I mean. So you've got your nerves coming in, your sensory nerves coming in, and the motor, or the neurons and the motor neurons, they're together in the nerve from the body, but right before the spinal cord, they're splitting with the sensory nerves going to the dorsal side, to the back, entering the spinal cord from the back, and the anterior or ventral side, the front side, are for the motor nerves. Again, notice that the cell body for the sensory nerve here is just outside the actual spinal cord in a ganglion, whereas the cell body for the motor nerve is hiding in the gray matter in the center of the spinal cord. This illustration just gives you, again, an idea of these different spinal nerves and what parts of the body they are innervating. So we see head and neck, even down to the hand from the cervical nerve. Basically, thoracic nerves are involved in the muscles of the chest and the abdomen, the lumbar nerves reaching down to the legs, and then your sacral nerves are involved in sort of internal functioning of the bowel, the bladder, and the sexual functions. The body can also be divided in what's known as dermatomes, derma having to do with skin. And so these are the areas of skin that are connected to a particular spinal nerve. And of course, loss of sensation on the skin could indicate problems with that nerve that may affect something that's deeper down. So if you follow the colors, this pale brown are your cervical nerves, the orange in the center, the thoracic nerves, that's what they'll be, where the skin that they'll be innervating. The dark red are our lumbar nerves, and then the sacral nerves are showing up as the yellow here, both in the genital area and even all the way down here at the bottom of the leg. So as previously stated, the autonomic nervous system is the automatic processes, things like your smooth muscle contractions of your digestive system, cardiac muscle, your heartbeat, the glands have to contract to release various substances. But within the autonomic system, we also further subdivide it into the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, because the neurons in these two divisions do different things. The sympathetic nervous system is our fight or flight mechanism, and the parasympathetic is the rest and digest. In both of these cases, there are ganglia that are containing the cell bodies of the neurons that are located outside of the spinal cord. The sympathetic nervous system, the ganglia, are just outside the spinal cord in the dorsal root ganglia, whereas in the parasympathetic system, they're actually close to the body organ itself. The sympathetic nervous system serves to put your body on alert. We refer to this as the fight or flight response, but it's really any time that you are needing to make a quick decision, you're under stress, you need to be alert. The neurons act to do things like enlarging your pupils so that you can improve your vision, especially for distance vision. Your heart rate will bump up so that you get more oxygen to your cells. Your lungs will be able to take in more oxygen because your airway muscles expand, so those bronchial tubes will be as big as possible. Your digestion is basically shut down so that no extra energy is going to that, and so is your bladder. Your urinary system doesn't make as much urine if you're in a high sympathetic state. And so overall, the activation of the sympathetic nervous system will improve your eyesight, your reflexes, your muscular endurance and strength so that you can cope with whatever crisis is in front of you. It activates in times when your body is under stress, even something as simple as exercise or getting sick or recovering from illness when extra energy is needed. Of course, you can't stay in a situation of high alert all the time. It's not good for your body to always be not only getting the nervous system, but you'll find when we talk about the endocrine system, there's a lot of hormones that are produced in a response to those sympathetic neurons. So you need something to put you back to standard functioning, and that is the role of the parasympathetic nervous system, to calm the body down, to return things to a more relaxed state. We call this the rest and digest situation. So everything that's happened in the sympathetic nervous system the reverse happens in the parasympathetic nervous system. The eyes, your pupils constrict so you can see better close up and are not focused so much on the distance. Everything that's sort of been shut down, extra energy that was going or not needed so far as producing saliva for your mouth or mucus for your nose, those are turned back on again. Breathing rate is reduced, heart rate is reduced, it's more relaxed breathing, it's not so much force in the heart rate, and then your digestion and urinary system bump back up again to return to taking care of that food that you have eaten to get the nutrients out of it. So the end effect is that the parasympathetic nervous system then balances and counteracts the effect of the sympathetic nervous system as you move through your day, having times where you need to be more alert and aroused and times when you need to really just kind of relax and chill. This diagram shows the various nerves that are part of the sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions. Notice the parasympathetic, just interestingly, the nerves are coming out of the high on the cervical vertebrae and from inside the brainstem and way down on the sacral vertebrae. So those are the locations where those nerves are coming that are part of the parasympathetic division, whereas the sympathetic division, we're seeing things more in the thoracic and lumbar section the nerves are coming from. So to check your understanding, can you identify the two types of nerves, or specifically the two types of neurons that are part of the peripheral nervous system, and identify the direction of travel for nerve impulses for each type? Can you explain the similarities between the structure of muscles and the structure of nerves? Can you talk about the two types of neuroglial cells and what they are doing in the peripheral nervous system to keep things functioning well? Can you describe the key characteristics of the cranial and spinal nerves? Where are they coming from in the body? Where are they going? What are they doing? And can you differentiate between the actions of the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous systems? If you're not sure about any of these questions, go back and listen to those sections of the video again so that you'll be prepared for the quiz.